Take your rock wool cube with your plant in it. You want your plant to have formed true leaves. Goes in the pot. You take your clay pellets, or you can use perlite. Done.
We're good?
So it doesn't flood. But so then, as long as it doesn't get super flooded, we'll have full heads of lettuce. Then no watering or weeding or anything. It just set it, leave it. So you can grow lots of stuff in this, but the beauty of lettuce is that you never have to add any water to it. You'll have nice big circulating systems. So these shouldn't need water or fertilizer often, and you don't need to check them regularly. The idea is that these will be touching the water and their roots will grow down through the bucket, and they won't need any more water until you're done harvesting and you dump them and restart them. The big thing is if we get a heavy rain, and this is mostly protected, but there's going to be rain that comes in on the wind and lands on the bucket. And so if we get a really heavy rain, you actually want to measure using the EC meter, which is of course outside. And if it drops below 800 EC, then you're going to add a tablespoon of fertilizer. And the fertilizer you're going to add is the Maxi Grow. So all you're going to do, the tablespoons are actually in here, is add a tablespoon in, stir it up a little bit until it dissolves. But other than that, you shouldn't need to add water, and you really shouldn't need to add fertilizer unless we get a heavy rain and the number is low.
So how often do you check this?
Only after a heavy rain.
Okay.
That's it. And then these will form nice big heads of lettuce, as long as they make it. And we'll break you. You can either harvest the whole head of lettuce and restart and put fresh lettuce in, or you can break lettuce off from the outside and use it in salads as needed.
If you have to garden the roots too?
No, you don't have to touch the roots. You just harvest and add fertilizer if necessary. That's it.
So if one of the plants doesn't make it, what do they do? Just leave it there?
Yeah, so I can actually leave. We have some extra seedlings, so I can leave the ones that are still alive here with you, and you can add water and keep them alive. And if for some reason one of these doesn't make it in the next week or so, you can replace it with a new seedling.
And
but once they die, if one of them dies and the plants are well established, you kind of just want to leave it because it'll end up drying out. Because what will happen is the water level should drop over time, and if you add a plant in, it will be touching the water. So as long as it's touching the water, you can add new plants in if one dies.
but you leave it where the dead one is in there, just so that the water's not evaporating.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah, because you don't want it to be open like this, because then all the water will evaporate. So you keep it as flush as you can, as close as you can. So the idea is you have evaporated water that comes off the top of this water, and that's where the plants get their oxygen from. So you want to keep that gap.
do you want to explain the perlite?
stone, all it is the stones here protect the gaps. So the perlite just keeps the water from evaporating. So there's the clay pellets, and then we added the white perlite, which we're also weaving, which goes on top.
Just to this system, not the other one.
Yeah. So the problem with perlite, this white stone, is that it clogs your pumps. So you only want to use it in a non-circulating system. You don't want to use it.
This one, not that one.
Not for the
outside
The
one.
outside one, you're just going to use the clay pellets. And that is what we call our bouquet system,
Where does that come from?
which is Haitian Creole for bucket, which is where we learned this. That's it. In hydroponics, it's all about water and fertilizer. Those are kind of the two essential components of the system. And so for the water, the system has a reservoir at the base, and the water moves to the top pipe and flows and splashes back down into the reservoir at the base. So this reservoir holds a lot of the water, but the pipes always have water in them. And so while the pump is running, the water level is going to be lower. So when the pump stops running at the end of the day, the water level will be back up to here. You can almost see the faint line. But when the pump is running, which is during the course of the day, the whole day, right, from about 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., it should be running. So when you come in the morning, or so let's say 10 o'clock, and you check the system, you should see that the pump is connected, the hose is connected, and the water is flowing up to the top. The water will flow and splash back down. So you should see it bubbling and the water up at the top. So when your water level drops below, as long as the pump is running, the water level should stay where this white tape is. So if it drops below this white tape, you go and you take the hose and you fill the water level up back to the white tape. So that's the big thing. So you want to check water level every day and want to make sure that the pumps are running every day. Those are really the big things. As long as the water is running and the water is in there and the pumps are running, most things should be good. If all of a sudden you come to the system one day and there's no water, and there was water in it yesterday, that means there's a leak somewhere. So either there's a leak in the bin, there's a leak in the pipes, or in the seal somewhere. So the first thing you want to check is if there's a leak, you actually want to check the plant's roots. So refill the water and watch the water flow and fill the system, and look on the pipes and see if there's water dripping out of the system. The most common leak that you'll see in the system is from the roots of the system. So these are really young roots, but very quickly the roots will form a huge ball, particularly on things like the cucumber, which is what this is. And so what you'll do every day is go through the pipes and check the roots. And if the roots are getting long, you actually want to just trim the roots along the edge of the pipe, which we have a video for that we have made. But you want to keep the roots no longer than about 8 to 12 inches, which means they'll stop the pipe from clogging. Because what happens, the most common leak is if, let's say, your cucumbers roots have gotten really big, they'll slow down the flow of the water so it spills out of the holes here rather than spilling back into the reservoir. So that's the big thing to check for leaks or anything like that. So when it comes to daily maintenance, checking the water is first, and then checking the roots is second. So you want to go through and you want to look and see how the root length is. If the roots are too long, you want to get a clean pair of scissors that you've actually washed or sterilized and trim the roots. And take the roots away from the system, throw them out. After you've checked the water levels and the roots levels, the next thing is you want to check the EC. So this EC is electrical connectivity. What it is it is a measure of how much nutrients are dissolved in the water. So it's not going to tell you things like how much nitrogen or phosphorus are in the water, but it'll tell you just a general idea of what's in the system. And so you want to check first when you go to check the level, then it says EC on the meter, which is essentially the electrical connectivity. If for some reason it shows ppm, which is parts per million, you want to hit the mode button, the center button, which switches it back to EC, because the number for ppm is different than EC. EC is a more accurate measure. So all you do to measure the EC in the system is you turn it on, make sure it's on EC, and you put it in the water. So this water level is actually a little low. We want it to start, we want it around 2,000. So we're gonna add a little bit more fertilizer to the water. But once this level of EC drops below 1,000, you're gonna add 4 tablespoons of fertilizer. And so that's what you'll continuously do. Once your tomato, and so that's gonna be every couple weeks though. You won't have to add fertilizer in these systems for at least a couple more weeks. But you still wanna check consistently and track the levels. Because if for some reason you start using a lot of water and maybe you have a slight leak, your nutrient levels can drop pretty significantly and then your plants will turn yellow. So these are tomatoes primarily. We have a couple peppers and we have cucumbers. So once the cucumbers and the tomatoes, once the tomatoes start to flower, you're gonna wanna switch the type of fertilizer that we're using. So right now, to start, we use the 12 tablespoons of what's called Maxi Grow, which is your first type of fertilizer. So this is for the vegetative growth. So when your tomatoes are growing green and large. Once your tomatoes start to flower, you actually want to drain the system and put in 12 tablespoons of Maxi Bloom. And then as the tomatoes fruit, this has higher levels of phosphorus, which is good for fruiting tomatoes. So that's the switch. And so that'll occur in about a month's time. You'll switch to Maxi Bloom, and you'll keep the Maxi Bloom in as they fruit and flower. I'm thinking through what am I missing?
We're going to stop there and
Yep.
then again go.
The seed buds.
Once per week.
What's that?
Once per week.
Once per week. And that'll help keep the aphids and things down.